Hello, and welcome to another episode of Snapple with Caprill. You saw my last episode. You understand. Hey, I'm going to share with you my screen here. I want you to see something. This is an excerpt from a presentation that I attended just last week, and I'm gonna really do a full recording on this in the future, but I came across some interesting slides. So I'm just going to share my screen with you right now and kind of give you some historical perspective. All right, so let me largen this. All right, so as you no doubt know, particularly those of you from Kansas City, this is Harry Truman. And as you probably are aware, the New York Times, I think this was the New York Times, famously not only predicted that Tom Dewey would defeat Harry Truman, they printed the paper saying that they did. Of course, that's not what happened. Now, the reason that the papers were so confident that Dewey would beat Truman was because of their polling. The problem was they were using telephones to do polling. And in the 1950s, the telephone was not as accessible as it is today. So they had a rather flawed sample. A lot of people didn't have phones, had every intention for voting for Truman. And of course, they did. Now, whenever something like that happens, there's always this natural fear that the world is going to go to Hades in a handbasket because so-and-so has won. So I want to give you a little bit of historical perspective here because we're approaching another election year, and it's always important to understand what we face. Okay, so Truman won, and the easiest way for me to explain all this is to just kind of show you that if you had invested money in the stock market, this is the total U.S. market during the Truman era, what your money would have grown to. And I'm going to show you other presidents as we go. We're also going to talk about some of the other historical data because a lot of these presidents were in office during some really bad economic times, and yet market performance actually wasn't all that bad, as you'll see. All right, so let's take a look at Truman here. Inauguration day was April 12th, 1945. As you may recall, FDR died in office, and Truman was sworn in the next day, and he served until 1952. $100 invested during that period of time would have increased by 2.5%. Now, keep in mind that when Truman was in office, we had inflation of 5.4%. Sounds familiar, right? We had unemployment of 8%, and the House and Senate were split. Kind of sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? All right. Then you had Ike, Dwight D. Eisenhower. He comes in in 1952. He leaves in 1960. And during that period of time, $100 grows to $312 during that 8-year period. Interesting. Growth was 3%, not bad. But look at his unemployment, 7.5%. And again, you'll notice that the Senate and House control was mixed during that period. Okay, still going up. Then we have the short-lived term of John F. Kennedy, and again, this is much shorter data, obviously, because sadly he was assassinated. But $100 grew to $141 during that time. It was an all-Democrat House and Senate. Unemployment 7.1%. Look at that. Seems like can't get off of that number, right? You'll notice a big decline there in mid 1962. Big reason for that, no doubt, the Cuban Missile Crisis that he was confronted with, and it definitely grew up. That it then recovered, as it tends to do. Then we got LBJ. LBJ, 1963 to 1968. He only ran one term, as you may recall. He was sworn in after JFK was assassinated. He then came in and only served that one term, decided not to run after that. You'll notice inflation down to 2.8%. Employment is down 5.7%. $100 grows to $181. Nixon, who swept into presidency, right? I mean, landslide for both his inaugural as well as his second term. $100 invested shrunk to $84. And he was president for, say, 69 to 74. So about 5 years. Unemployment was 6.1%. And you'll notice the Senate and the House were all Democratic at the time. Then we have Gerald Ford. He's only president for a very short time. He became president during a very deep recession. $100 grew to $141. Maximum employment was 9%. Inflation was 6.5%. You might remember Jerry would wear these pins that said "whip," or excuse me, "win." Whip inflation now. I don't know who his PR guy was, but unemployment 9%. Yeah, the 70s were just a bad era. Then comes Jimmy Carter. Great home builder, not necessarily a great president. I've heard Democrats say that too. All right. Look at the inflation, 10.2%, maximum unemployment, 7.8%. But even during that time, that one term, $100 goes to $173. I mean, we'll look at a lot of bad economic periods here, and yet it still grows. And Carter had both the House and the Senate in his party, so he was completely in control. Dutch Reagan comes in, 1980. There, $100 goes to $285 over the time that he was president, over the 8 years that he was president. Maximum unemployment when he took over, pretty bad. He inherited from Carter, 10.8%. Definitely got inflation down, got good growth. But notice, never had control of the House of Representatives. That was Tip O'Neill's deal, if you remember back then. Senate control, he had it in the beginning, then he lost it later on. Then we've got George H.W. Bush. I just botched the president's name. H.W. Bush. One term, there was both a Democrat control, both the House and Senate. Maximum unemployment during the time, 7.8%. Still, markets grew. $100 goes to $173. Kind of seems like it doesn't matter who's president, right? Well, you're going to see there's going to be another example coming up. You can probably guess it, where markets declined during a certain presidency. I am going to suggest, though, maybe it's not as big of a deal as people think. Bill Clinton, $100 in his 8 years goes to $386. Very good. Maximum unemployment was 7.3% during his time. Inflation 2.5%. Economy grew. Maximum growth 3.9%. Definitely a good economic time. He'd never had full control of the House or the Senate. Well, he maybe had it his first term, half of his first term, but that was pretty much a split House all the way through. Say what you will about Bubba. He was a good politician and a pretty good negotiator. So for him and Newt Gingrich to get together and Bob Dole and cut some deals was, you don't see that happening, unfortunately, too much. Everything gets personal now. Then we've got George W. Bush, 8 years president, not a great economic time. 2008 kicked in. You can see here right up until 2008, he definitely had some growth, but it all collapsed thereafter that. But inflation was low, unemployment 7.8%. Of course, we all know what happened in 2008 with the housing crisis. Barack Obama comes in office, maximum unemployment 10%. Mixed control of the House and the Senate. Yet despite it all, equity markets continue to grow. Yes, he did have a short recession. $100 grows to $266. Donald J. Trump, $100 grows to $176. Maximum unemployment, as was 14%. That was largely driven by COVID. Annualized inflation was 1.9%. You'll notice the deep decline of COVID and in the market values, and then of course they came back. And then lastly, we have Joe Biden, who right now at $100 invested. His inauguration date through last June, or June of 2022, was 112. This number is probably starting to track a little bit downward. He did have full control of the House and Senate through the first couple of years, and then it's kind of lingered. Now, if you're going to do this data, you're going to crunch, you can say who's best for the presidency. I think you've seen that there's been positive results for both. Now, it may surprise you that if you average them all out, Republicans actually did much more poorly. And this goes, if you go way back, largely because Herbert Hoover was in office when the Great Depression happened, and the results during the George W. Bush era. I'll tell you, for whatever it's worth, about the housing crisis, that was pretty foreseeable. For years, various congressmen, John McCain especially, would make the point that Fannie and Freddie were taking on loans that really weren't worth taking on. And banks were just selling their loans to the government, and then these loans are being commoditized, and it was eventually ready to blow, and it did. I can remember clients going to closings with no money down and getting money back at the closing. Crazy, but that was occurring back then. I don't really blame various presidents for the general economy. I think the economy is far greater than what our laws can do. They can certainly stimulate things in the short run, but I don't think that they're really going to have an overall lasting impact. That's why, frankly, I'm very dubious about electric cars. I don't, whatever you may think about them, I still think that market forces will drive that. Right now, it is governmental forces that are driving these car companies into going with all electric vehicles. I worry that's going to backfire big time. Number one, we don't have the grid for it. And number two, I don't believe for 1 second it's good for the good for the environment. But that's just me. I look at the fact that we're making so much electricity with coal, and these lithium batteries are not easily disposed of. And there's pricing issues and all the other things that could potentially go wrong. I always say, let market forces drive it. If eventually gas gets too expensive and people are demanding some other alternative, fine. The profit motive will be there for companies to do it. But when you have government pushing companies to do it, and there is no profit motive, any project that they do could be short-lived. I may be wrong, but I really feel that we live in a much cleaner planet than I think we give ourselves credit for. But I don't think there's anything really clean about electricity, not under its current setup. You might believe things will change. We'll have more wind or hydropower. I'm very dubious about that. It just doesn't seem like that's the case. But wouldn't be the first time I'm wrong. Wouldn't be the last time I'm right, though. Anyway, so hopefully that gives you just a little bit of perspective about things. I know this is slightly longer, Coffee with Caprill, or in this case, Snapple with Caprill. I'm going to be sharing more of this presentation with you in the months ahead, but I wanted you to kind of see this data and understand as we get ready to go to another election year. It's rarely as dire as they make it to be. I remember when Trump won. Kind of funny, you got to admit, regardless of who you voted for, to watch the media literally having seizures. I mean, it was almost amusing. Walter Cronkite, no one knew what his political beliefs were. He was a liberal, by the way, but no one knew that. He was very stoic. He reported the news, and we didn't see that. And of course, what was predicted was, major doom and gloom for the stock market. And initially there was a drop, but then it soared right back. Unfortunately, it was COVID that undid a lot of the good things that happened during that period, whether they were Trump's credit or not. I don't care. Point is that if you're have the misfortune of being president during a pandemic, well, history is probably not going to be as kind to you. All right, so have a great month. Have a great holiday season. We're approaching it. We're approaching Thanksgiving. I hope you have a great time with your family. God bless, and we'll talk soon. Take care. Bye-bye.